A standard tub full of frozen water packs more chilling capacity than 7 Tesla Powerwalls combined. Power companies have been well aware of this since the mid-90s, yet they've intentionally kept it out of your hands. Before we get into the heavy details, you need to memorize a specific number. That number is 334. That represents the exact amount of heat in kilojoules that a single kilogram of water sucks up as it transitions from solid ice back to a liquid state. It happens with every single kilogram, without fail. Push that chilled water through a copper heat exchanger, and the temperature in your room plummets by 20 degrees within a sealed system, completely ignoring how muggy it is outside. Your standard AC unit isn't capable of that. Your rooftop solar array isn't either. But a basic reservoir of ice achieves both simultaneously using roughly $30 of tap water and copper tubing. In the science world, this is known as the latent heat of fusion. When water freezes, energy doesn't just vanish into the void. It is systematically expelled, kilojoule after kilojoule, into the surrounding environment. Flip the thermodynamic script, and that identical amount of energy is pulled right back out when the ice thaws. Think of the frozen block as a high-yield savings account for cold air, allowing you to make withdrawals exactly when you need them. To truly grasp the scale here, consider that a single cubic meter of ice contains an estimated 93 kilowatt-hours of latent cooling potential. A typical Tesla Powerwall maxes out at 13.5 kilowatt-hours of electrical storage. So, a simple tub filled with ice banks, the cooling equivalent of nearly 7 of those premium batteries, all for a raw material investment of $30. Leveraging the energy density found in phase change cooling is arguably the most massive untapped resource in home thermal dynamics. Yet everyday consumers have been completely boxed out of this concept since the invention of the modern air conditioner. Let's stack it up against a typical window AC. Your average 5,000 BTU unit generates around 1,460 watts of cooling power while sucking down 500 watts from your wall outlet. The catch is that the cool air only flows while that compressor is actively humming. Kill the power to the compressor, and your breeze vanishes in less than 120 seconds. Ice plays by different rules. A well-insulated 50-gallon barrel filled to the brim with frozen water banks about 70 kilowatt-hours of latent thermal capacity once it hits a full freeze. On a sweltering July evening, cooling an average bedroom requires only about 2 kilowatt-hours. This means a solitary tank, completely frozen on a clear morning, can keep your sleeping quarters frosty for 35 consecutive nights without needing another drop of power. The local power grid could collapse, thick clouds could blanket your solar panels for over a week, and your living space would remain perfectly chilled because the cold is physically sitting right there in your reservoir, ready to deploy. To truly appreciate this, look at how lithium-ion technology tackles the identical issue. Setting up a Tesla Powerwall with enough capacity to power a bedroom AC unit through a single humid night will set you back roughly $8,000 after installation. Achieving that exact same cooling reserve inside an ice reservoir costs $70 in raw parts. That is a staggering 100-to-1 price difference. Your expensive battery will survive maybe a decade or a decade and a half before its internal chemistry breaks down. That ice setup will easily last 4 decades because water molecules simply do not degrade over time. This brings us to the financial reality that the home HVAC industry refuses to advertise. Storing a single kilowatt-hour of cooling power using ice runs you about $3 to $5 in physical materials. Hoarding that identical kilowatt-hour inside a lithium battery costs approximately $200. Frozen water is 40 times more cost-effective per unit of storage than the most affordable lithium tech currently available. Plus, it never loses capacity, it poses absolutely no fire hazard, and you don't have to install complex software just to keep it from failing. This is the core controversy of the narrative, and it's been sitting right out in the open for 3 decades. If freezing water is this ancient and effective, the obvious question is unavoidable. Why is everyone dropping $40,000 on modern heat pumps instead of $700 on a water barrel? The explanation traces back to 1995, centered on a business named Ice Energy and their flagship invention, the Ice Bear. The engineers at Ice Energy cracked the code on home cooling economics a full 30 years prior to the rest of the market. Their first Ice Bear was basically a fridge-sized cabinet placed outdoors alongside a normal split AC system. Overnight, taking advantage of cheaper grid power and cooler outside air, the machine's compressor would freeze roughly 450 pounds of water inside a built-in reservoir. When the sun came up, rather than firing up that power-hungry compressor again, the system just pumped warm refrigerant through tubing submerged in that solid block. The thawing ice chilled the fluid chilled the house. Power usage from the compressor during the most intense afternoon heat plunged by 95%. The calculations were solid. The patents were secured. Units rolled off the assembly line. Yet they never made it to residential driveways. The only customers were the power companies. Southern California Edison single-handedly installed upwards of 5,000 of these Ice Bear machines throughout the American Southwest between 2007 and 2016. Public Service Enterprise Group snapped up thousands on top of that. The motivation was incredibly straightforward. The power company doesn't lose sleep over saving you money on your monthly statement. What they obsess over is peak load. That massive surge in power usage between 4 and 7 in the evening is exactly what makes utilities construct incredibly costly natural gas peaker facilities. Every AC unit in the metropolis fires up simultaneously during those 3 hours, and the power grid is forced to swallow that massive hit. A single Ice Bear trims 15 to 20 kilowatts of demand from a specific structure. Multiply that by 1,000 units, and you've erased 15 megawatts of demand. That equates to an entire power plant they simply don't need to construct, a one-time investment that vanishes from the grid's burden permanently. The paperwork filed with the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission is entirely open to the public. Power providers scattered thousands of these rigs across the Southwest over a 20-year stretch. Ice Energy raked in millions of dollars in demand response compensation. The commercial buildings stayed frigid for pennies on the dollar, yet not a single everyday homeowner could purchase one. So what was the bottleneck? The reality is that the home climate control sector is heavily guarded by contractor networks. Giants like Carrier, Trane, Lennox, Goodman, and Daikin have a stranglehold on the supply chain for any cooling gear moved through certified technicians in America. They flat out denied the residential certification required for normal people to install an Ice Bear. The hardware was real. The legal rights were locked in. The economics were validated on massive utility grids. But the route to your house was entirely walled off by licensing bureaucracy. It's crucial to pause and look at exactly who appeared at those Federal Energy Regulatory Commission meetings to fight against home certification. It was the air conditioning contractors of America submitting warnings that letting regular folks handle refrigerant hardware was a massive public safety hazard. The Environmental Protection Agency actually passed on taking action on those claims. However, licensing authorities across 27 different states pushed through rules that essentially mandated a certified professional's involvement for any job involving refrigerants. Those specific state-level laws remain completely active right now. They act as the literal barricade preventing the home ice battery industry from taking off. Fast forward to 2019, and Ice Energy ultimately declared bankruptcy following years of unsuccessful attempts to crack the residential barrier. The intellectual property was scooped up by an investment group named Axiom Cloud. The core science didn't vanish. It simply gathered dust in a filing cabinet while millions of homeowners continued shelling out top dollar for grid power to blast their ACs during peak pricing hours. Meanwhile, the highly affordable alternative was literally chilling in a grocery store just down the street. But that corporate collapse essentially gifted us a master blueprint. The patent filings are out there for anyone to read. The required hardware is entirely off the shelf, meaning a capable DIYer can recreate a scaled-down Ice Bear for under $1,000 in materials. And frankly, the math looks even better when you shrink it down because you can better control the variables. A standard 300-square-foot American bedroom demands roughly 2 kilowatt-hours of cooling on a muggy summer evening. A complete 90-day hot season for that specific space tallies up to about 180 kilowatt-hours. A pair of 50-gallon, heavily insulated barrels of frozen water packs around 140 kilowatt-hours of latent thermal energy. That covers nearly the whole summer for a single room, powered purely by the sun, with only a single upfront cost. A viral DIY project from March of this year proved this exact math on a residential level. The creator utilized one 200-watt solar panel. He hooked it up to a compact 12-volt DC compressor salvaged from a boat refrigerator. The chilling loop was fed into a 50-gallon, heavily insulated poly tank holding water and a sealed copper spiral. On one clear Tuesday in early spring, that setup turned roughly 30 pounds of water into solid ice. That single freeze successfully kept a 15 by 15 workspace perfectly chilled for 4 consecutive nights, with the solar panel casually topping off the ice reserves during daylight hours. The documented parts tally? $687. Imagine a brutal August Tuesday with this setup. The sun rises at 6, and by 7, your panel is already feeding juice to the compressor. By 10 in the morning, the water inside the barrel is turning to slush. By 2 in the afternoon, precisely when grid strain is at its absolute worst and your neighbors are getting crushed by their electric rates, Your barrel is a solid block of ice. Around 3, when the room starts getting uncomfortably warm, the chilled water loop engages. It pulls the stagnant hot air across the fan coil and transfers that heat directly from your bedroom into the gradually thawing block of ice. By the time you go to sleep, the room has been sitting at a crisp 68 degrees for hours. Come morning, the ice has maybe melted down by a third, and the whole sequence restarts. Your solar panel essentially pays for itself in 30 days, and that tank owes you absolutely nothing. For comparison, outfitting that same office space with a Mitsubishi mini-split heat pump will cost around $3,400, heavily reliant on the grid every second it's running. That 5-to-1 price discrepancy doesn't even factor in blackout survivability. Good luck firing up a mini-split when a late summer hurricane knocks out the neighborhood, but that ice tank, it keeps right on working. The actual construction is simple enough that you could read off a list at your local hardware store. You'll need a single 200-watt monocrystalline solar panel, which runs about $150 online. Grab a small DC compressor or cannibalize a 12-volt chest freezer for around $250. Pick up a 50-gallon polytank, the kind used for off-grid water caching, for roughly $200. You'll need 50 feet of half-inch refrigeration-grade copper pipe for the cold loop, costing $40. Snag a basic variable speed 12-volt circulation pump for the water loop, about $20. Finally, buy 2-inch closed-cell polyiso foam board to completely jacket the tank, which is another $40. You're looking at a grand total around $700 depending on where you live. The order of operations is crucial. Build the freeze element first, handle the plumbing second, and insulate last. You drop the copper tubing into the tank in a vertical spiral, ensuring the water freezes uniformly from the perimeter inward. Connect your compressor to that copper using a loop charged with either R290 propane or R134A. Propane is highly efficient and perfectly legal in most off-grid setups, keeping the total charge under 50 grams, though always check local regulations. Wire the compressor directly to the solar panel using a 12-volt charge controller. Then, wrap every single side of that barrel with at least 2 inches of the polyiso foam, sealing every joint flawlessly. Skip the insulation, and the ambient air will melt your charge in 48 hours. Wrap it right, and that barrel retains its frozen payload for over 3 weeks. There are a few pro tips not explicitly mentioned on a basic parts list. Use distilled or heavily filtered water inside the barrel to prevent mineral buildup from degrading the copper. Normal tap water will do the job, but it slashes the lifespan of your coil from 4 decades down to about 15 years. Your choice of refrigerant is also highly critical. R290 propane is wildly cheaper, vastly more efficient, and totally fine under that 50-gram limit. The standard R134A is what you'll find at any supply house, but it costs twice as much and performs noticeably worse at these specific operating temperatures. If you're hunting for a used compressor, target marine or RV fridges instead of a standard basement freezer. Those 12-volt marine units are specifically built to handle fluctuating solar power and run cooler. The chilled water circuit simply runs from your ice barrel to a compact fan coil positioned inside the room you're targeting. That fan coil is identical to the air handler inside any typical split AC, but instead of circulating chemical refrigerant, you're just pushing ice-cold water through it. A tiny 20-watt fan pushes the conditioned air into your space. The total constant power required to run the cooling side is roughly 25 watts, which is less juice than an old-school light bulb. Finally, let's talk about the 3 critical mistakes that will ruin your build in order of severity. Mistake number 1 is undersizing your reservoir. One 50-gallon barrel banks about 70 kilowatt-hours of latent energy, perfect for a single bedroom for a month. Trying to condition an entire 2,000-square-foot house with one barrel is a mathematical joke. A full house in the desert requires 60 to 100 kilowatt-hours daily during a scorcher. You would need 4 to 7 of these barrels operating side by side. The rule is to build modularly, dedicate one tank per room based on who is using it. Don't attempt to make a massive central system. Mistake number 2 is sloppy insulation. If you don't wrap every single square inch of that tank in 2 inches of closed-cell foam, including the lid, the ice acts as a sponge for ambient heat. The whole block will thaw in 2 or 3 days, no matter how much solar energy is pumping into the compressor. A poorly sealed barrel turns your $700 thermal battery into a $700 puddle of room temperature water in less than 72 hours. The solution is the foam wrap, taped completely shut, 0 exceptions. One unsealed gap ruins the whole project. The final mistake is getting the fan coil airflow wrong. If you pump the chilled water through the handler too slowly, your room stays hot. Pump it too aggressively and the water returns to the tank too warm, depleting your ice reserve twice as fast as it should. The sweet spot for a standard bedroom is about half a gallon a minute. Conveniently, that's exactly the flow rate of a standard 12-volt car coolant pump. Nail the flow rate, and this rig keeps your bedroom parked at 68 degrees from 10 at night until 7 in the morning every single night of the hot season. Size the barrel correctly, wrap it flawlessly, dial in the fan speed, and the physics does exactly what the math promises. 20 degrees of pure cooling, 90 days of total off-grid operation. A singular materials cost under $1,000 and absolutely zero monthly utility bills ever again. If you think a $700 water barrel keeping your room frosty for 3 months is impressive, wait until you find out what a $300 piece of buried pipe can achieve year-round. Click right here to watch that video next.